The Dark Side of Innocence, Chapter 1. James sat across from Giovanni's desk, fidgeting uncomfortably as his boss handed him a bottle of pills. "They'll make a man out of you," Giovanni chuckled mirthlessly. James' eyes were drawn to the gun laying on Giovanni's desk, feeling an overwhelming urge to pick it up. "This is your last chance," Giovanni was saying, but James didn't hear him. His hand was creeping ever nearer to the gun, until at last he had it within his grasp. He slowly lifted the gun from its place, compelled by some unseen and yet unstoppable force as he aimed it at Giovanni's head. Closing his eyes, he felt his finger pull the trigger. James woke up in a cold sweat. "Where did that come from?" he asked himself, wiping his forehead. He did not have nightmares often, and murder was certainly not the main subject when he did. He rolled over and reached for the bottle of pills on the table between his bed and Jesse's. Why had the boss ordered him to take them? "They'll make a man out of you," he recalled Giovanni telling him. "This is your last chance. If you continue to fail me after this, you're fired. Jesse, too." Giovanni leaned back in his chair and reached to pet the Persian at his side. "You're weak, James," he continued, his eyes reflecting in an inner coldness that frightened James, even now as he lay in bed recalling the meeting. "And weak people have no place in this organization. I'm tired of your constant failure, giving Team Rocket a bad name." Before James could point out that Team Rocket was supposed to have a bad name, Giovanni had promptly told him to get out. "What's this stuff supposed to do?" he wondered, placing the bottle of pills back on the nightstand. He had taken the first one just before going to bed. They were large white pills with a bitter taste. As Jessie coughed in her sleep, James found his attention turned to her. God, he loved her. He wasn't exactly sure what the relationship with her partner was. They lived together, worked together, and were practically joined at the hip 24 hours a day. They'd been best friends for how long? He had no longer remembered. He found it hard to imagine her ever not being a part in his life. While their unity couldn't exactly be called a romantic relationship, their love for each other was plain. At the first sight of danger in their highly stressful job, the first place they took refuge was in each other's arms. Although the content with their life together in Team Rocket, both were secretly beginning to want more, and neither knew quite how to tell the other. "Someday," thought James as he rolled onto his back and stared at the ceiling. "Someday it'll all work out. Someday I'll figure out how to tell her." Lulled by Jesse's peaceful breathing, James drifted back to sleep. "Get up, lazy!" Jesse scolded, throwing a pillow at James. "Are you going to sleep all day?" "Go away," James mumbled, turning over to go back to sleep. "Come on, James," Jessie ordered sternly. "We gotta catch that Pikachu! Get up!" She hit him upside the head with her pillow. James ignored her. Jessie was starting to lose her temper. She grabbed him by the collar of his pajama top and dragged him out of bed. James mumbled something suspiciously like a swear word and got up. "What did you say?" Jessie asked, as Jessie opened the bottle of pills and swallowed one. "Nothing," he grumbled, closing the bottle and setting it back down. Without another word, he went to the bathroom and slammed the door behind him. Not only did their newest plan to capture Pikachu stink, it involved crawling through the sewer, but so did James's attitude. He kicked him out twice, who furious swiped him in return, and the only 2 words he said to Jessie all morning were "shove it." Jessie was too shocked to even hit him with a paper fan. By 2 o'clock, they had been blasted off twice and decided to give up for the day. When they got back home, Jessie went to take a shower and James started cooking a late lunch. He seemed unable to concentrate on what he was doing and wound up burning the fried rice. He became so enraged that he threw the frying pan across the room, nearly hitting Meowth. "Hey, watch where you're throwing!" the Pokemon shouted. Jessie, who had just come out of the shower, was becoming increasingly concerned. "James, do you feel alright?" she asked, unaware that her towel wrapped around her was slipping off. Fine, he shouted, cleaning up the mess of rice all over the kitchen floor. He looked up at her and noticed at the same time she did that her towel was falling to the floor. Jessie blushed and quickly retrieved it. As she rewrapped herself, James felt a strange, violent urge sweep over him. The sudden intensity of the impulse scared him, and he quickly pushed it back down inside him. Later that evening, Jessie again approached him about his strange behavior. His mood had greatly improved, and he felt rather guilty about his early actions. "I'm sorry, Jess. I don't know what went through me. I feel a lot better now, though." "I'm glad," she said, sitting down on the bed next to him. "Hey, James." "Yeah?" "If anything were, well, bothering you, you know you can talk to me, right?" He looked up to her. "Of course, Jess. We tell each other everything, right?" She smiled. "Right, but—" her smile slowly faded. "Sometimes I'm afraid that maybe you're uncomfortable around me, because I look like her." She lowered her eyes to the floor. "You know, Jezebel?" James stared at her surprise. That was the last thing he had ever expected her to say. "Jessie, nothing could be further from the truth. You're nothing like Jezebel. I mean, you have a temper, but you're not." James stopped, not sure what word to use. "How do you describe a person like Jezebel?" Jessie continued to stare at the floor. "But I know I can be mean sometimes. And I thought that, well, after today, I thought that maybe you were getting tired of me." "Jessie, of course not!" James exclaimed, genuinely distressed as he put his arm around her. "Jessie, you are my best friend in the whole world, and I wouldn't trade what we have for anything. I never compare you with Jezebel. That woman is deranged. She chased me around with a whip, for God's sake." He shuddered at the memory, and a bitter anger feeling swelled up in his heart, remembering how his parents had allowed it. Hell, they sat in the same room drinking tea while it happened. Remarked on how they thought how a mad woman made for each other. James pushed those feelings back inside him and concentrated on Jessie. "You're nothing like her," he said, hugging her tightly. "Nothing at all." That night, after taking another pill, James lay down in his bed thinking about his first adult encounter with Jezebel and his family, and the subsequent encounters he'd had since then. He'd recalled the sick feeling in the pit of his stomach when he first realized his parents would both allow and even insist Jezebel in whatever particular abuse she deemed necessary to break his spirit, as the lunatic chased him around whip in hand. He shivered. His heart began to race as he remembered running frantically down a beach like a haunted animal, with Jezebel hot on his heels after she had mistakenly blasted off with him in Meowth instead of Jessie. Another time she had tracked down one of his summer estates. How could any parent want a woman like that for a daughter-in-law? How could they claim to care so much about his future when they cared so little about his happiness? "How could they do that to me?" he thought angrily. "I'm their son. Aren't they supposed to love me for who I am?" Troubled by these thoughts, James drifted off into an uneasy sleep. "James, dear, it's time for the wedding," Jezebel said, cracking her whip on the floor. "Your mother and I are tired of waiting for you to grow up," his father said, standing behind Jezebel. His mother nodded silent agreement. Jezebel cracked her whip again. "Let the taming begin!" She slashed the whip at him, and he raised his hands in defense. The whip curled itself around his arm, and he jerked it out of Jezebel's hands. This time things were going to be different. He unwrapped his arm and took the handle in his own hand. "I hate you!" he screamed at her, striking her with the whip. Jezebel screamed as the whip hit her again and again. At last she slumped to the floor in a bloody heap, beaten beyond recognition. He turned to his parents. "I hate all of you!" he shouted, sending his new weapon against them. Neither of them made a move to stop them. When they both lay a similar state to Jezebel's, James dropped the whip, horrified realization of what he'd done. He dropped to his knees and began to cry at the sight of his beaten and bleeding mother. "Oh my God, what have I done?" James woke up crying. He felt like he was going to be sick. Taking a deep breath, he tried to steady his nerves. "Are you all right?" asked Jessie, who had woken up to the sound of his crying. "It was just a dream," he said, more to himself than her, as he laid back down to go back to sleep. Just a dream. The next day was even worse. Their latest plan to capture Pikachu involved using bazookas to distract their newly reunion twerp trio. While Meowth netted Pikachu, Jessie and James fired shots away from Ash and company to divert their attention, while Meowth tried to net Pikachu from behind. All was going according to plan until James decided to fire at the children, missing Ash by merely inches. "Are you insane?" Jessie screamed at him. "Listen, if we just shoot the kid, then we can grab Pikachu," James reasoned. Jessie couldn't believe what she was hearing. "We are not trying to kill anybody," she shouted. "Well, maybe if we were, we would succeed for a change," he yelled. By that time they got back to HQ, none of them were speaking. Meowth had called James a nutcase, and Jessie was secretly beginning to agree. They sat around the place in silence for a while until Jessie couldn't take it anymore. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she shouted at James, who was sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. He looked up with her helpless eyes of a frightened child and replied softly, "I don't know." The answer seemed to infuriate Jessie, although the truth frightened her terribly. James felt an increasing rage building up inside of him as his partner continued to rant and rave as she stormed around the room. The strange, violent emotion he had felt toward her yesterday began to surface again. "Are you even listening to me?" Jessie shouted, beginning to shake him. Her close to proximity smell of perfume began to make his head spin. His anger/desire began to intensify, as his conscience was telling him that he had to get away from her, now. With his last bit of self-control, he pushed Jessie away and ran to the bathroom, locking himself inside. Jessie and Meowth heard the sound of glass breaking, and would later learn that James had shattered their bathroom mirror. A few minutes later, Jessie knocked at the door. "James, are you all right?" No answer. "James, are you sick?" "I think so," came the sobbing reply. It sounded like he was sitting on the floor, leaning against the other side of the door. "James, I'm sorry for yelling at you. Please let me in." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because I'm afraid." Jessie wondered at this cryptic response. "Afraid of what?" she asked, first to herself and then out loud. "Jessie, could you just leave me alone for a while, please?" Jessie didn't know what to say. "All right," she finally managed, her voice falling a few seconds before adding, "James, if you need me, I'll be here, okay?" She drew a sharp intake breath, followed by another sob from the other side of the door as she said this. "James?" "All right," he finally replied. Jessie sat down on her bed, not knowing what to think. Her first thought was that James had meant he was afraid she would yell at him again, but some deep primal instinct inside her was telling her this wasn't the case.